Welcome back. It's Jennifer McGuire, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. So today I am sharing with you a die cut letterpress technique. This is such a fun technique that I hope you'll try, and it works with many dies that you have. You'll see I use a variety today to demonstrate that. See that flower and leaf? They're pressed into the paper with ink, so it gives you the look of letterpress, but all I'm using is stacked die cuts. Well, today I'll show you how to do this with regular die cuts, layering die cuts, and even background die cuts. I've done a video similar to this in the past, and I'll link to it here if you want to check it out, but today I'm stepping it up and sharing even more ideas. Let's start with this example here. If you look closely in the background, you'll see a yellow area with lots of texture to it. That's our first example of faux letterpress. For this, I'm using the new Altenew Lacy panel die. I really like the detail of this. And I've die cut it from 3 pieces of white cardstock, and I'll glue those together. I'm just using a liquid glue here. You could use any glue that you wanted. I didn't really take care to make sure I was doing a good job applying the glue. It really doesn't matter for this. Then I will use the die and cut it from vellum. It doesn't matter what type of vellum you use. I used a heavyweight for most of my examples today, and it worked great. But you could use a lightweight vellum if that's all you have. I will glue the vellum die cut, you can see it there to the right, onto the top layer of our white stacked die cuts. So we have 3 stacked die cuts and 1 vellum. By the way, you don't need to use white cardstock for the back there. You could use scrap cardstock. Okay, after giving the adhesive and those layers some time to dry, it's time to do the letterpress that you see in the background here. For my letterpress, I like to use watercolor paper because it doesn't have as much of a tendency to crack as you'd go to get with regular cardstock, but I did try this with regular cardstock and it worked great too. I just really like the results of the letterpress look on watercolor paper. I use Tim Holtz watercolor paper because it's bright white and it has a smooth side, so I'll do the letterpress on the smooth side of it. Now to do this, you also need a die cut machine, and you will set up your die cut machine as if you were making an impression with a die. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 because it's easy for me to pull in and out of the camera. You can see the instructions there, what you need to do to make an impression with a die. You need this embossing mat, which is flexible, and I lay that right on the platform. And then you'll need the embossing plate. Just look at the instructions for your machine to determine how to do this. You just need to follow the instructions to make an impression or emboss with a die. Okay, onto that, I'm putting my watercolor paper with the smooth side up so it's ready to go. Okay, now we have our layered die cut with the vellum facing up. Make sure you've got the vellum facing up for this. Now you can ink this up with any ink that you want. A dye or pigment ink work best. I prefer dye inks. I'm using Altenew dye ink today. This is a baby pink. I'll show you a few different ways to apply the ink, and you'll see more options throughout the video. For this example, I'm taking the ink pad directly to the vellum and rubbing the ink around to get good coverage. I will then take my blending brush and kind of smooth it out to remove some of the ink. I didn't want it to be too heavy. So that's one way to do a lighter coverage. Of course, you could use a lighter ink if you prefer. Now this kept moving around, so I put my sticky mat underneath it. I'll link to that below, and that helps to hold it as I ink it. Now I'm picking that up, laying it onto my watercolor paper, and then I will put the embossing plate on top and run it back and forth. And what happens is that stacked die cut presses into the paper, leaving an impression. And because I had vellum on top, the ink is still wet on there because it doesn't really absorb into the vellum, and the vellum transfers to the paper too. So there's our first example. But the great thing is that stacked die cut can be used over and over and over to make multiple backgrounds. So it's kind of like you're making your own embossing folder. This time I am just applying a light amount of ink using an Altenew blending brush and the same baby pink ink. So you can see it's a much lighter coverage. I'll lay that down on another piece of watercolor paper, put my embossing plate on top of that, and run it back and forth. Sorry my head gets in the way. Sometimes that's the best way to make sure you have things straight and centered. Okay, this time we have a very light amount of color because I used the blending brush, and look at that. Such a beautiful texture. This time I will go direct to paper with the ink, and this will leave a heavier amount of ink onto the vellum, so more ink will transfer when we do our technique. Now when you go to put this onto your paper, be careful not to move it because you don't want to leave ink where you don't want it. So I lay it down, carefully put the other plate on top, run it back and forth, and look at that, a beautiful transfer of color. It's hard to see the texture there, but it's got this beautiful texture to it that's pressed into the paper. So there are the 3 different options there. Before we move on, I also wanted to show you that you can leave it uninked. So you could actually skip the vellum on top, you don't need it, or you can put it on there if you wanted to, and make an impression without any ink on it. There was a little pink left on there, but I wanted to show you that's an option. Okay, now for my card, I wanted to use yellow ink. So this is buttercream, and I think buttercream works really well for this faux letterpress look. So there we placed it on the watercolor paper, run it back and forth, and look how beautiful that is. So I did 2 of those for my 2 first card examples for today's video. There's a close look at the texture. And yes, you can use regular cardstock for this. I just like the results of the watercolor paper better. So here are my first 2 finished cards. Now I'll show you those layering flowers that I added to it later in this video. It's the Altenew Jumbo Garden layering dies. So I'll show that later, but all I did was stamped a sentiment underneath each of the letterpress areas on our background, trimmed it down, added it to a cream note card, added my layered die cuts and a few pearls. By the way, the I appreciate you, so many things about you is from this Altenew Forever Friends stamp set. So in this case, I covered a lot of the faux letterpress look. However, in real life, you can see it and the texture really stands out. But if you wanted to, you could put a smaller amount of flowers so that more of it would show. Okay, I will come back and share some more ideas for using a single die to create this letterpress look. However, I wanted to share an example now of using a layering die set for this faux letterpress look. Now I'm using the Altenew Watercolor Garden Layering Die Set. I'm a big fan of layering dies. I think they're so much fun to use, and I'm really excited that Altenew now makes it so that a bunch of the die cut shapes are together on one die, which makes it so much easier than having a bunch of individual dies floating around. Also, all of the shapes that are on one die get cut from the same color of cardstock. So there's a lot less planning out what you're going to cut from what color, finding the different dies that layer together. This makes it so much easier. So what I like to do is put each of the die onto a piece of cardstock. Just plan it right out from the beginning. Usually the images on a layering flower that have the most solid area get the lightest color or the darkest color, and then you work your way in the opposite direction. In this case, I did the lightest color for the most solid area. You can see the different shades I have there. I just grabbed these from my scrap drawer of colored cardstocks. Then we have the greens, and then we have the center of our flowers. So now that everything's here, I can go ahead and do my die cutting. I have a little tray with different sections in front of me. I find that very handy with crafting. And I'm putting each of the layering pieces into a compartment. So once I'm done, I'll have all the pieces that get glued together to create a flower. And I'm just following the layering guide that came with this die set. You can also find their layering guides on their website. So it makes it very easy to figure out which go together. But by having all of these dies connected into one big die is really a huge time saver. So now I have all of my pieces cut and they're all in a tray, all organized. So all I have to do is grab the pieces and glue them together. And I'll create several different flowers and leaves here. I really enjoy putting layering die cuts together. There's something fun about it. You create something that you can easily add onto any card. And it's a great way to use up any of your colorful scraps. You can even cut these from pattern papers if you wanted. Now I'm just going to speed through here and give you a look at all the different flower dies or die cut arrangements that you can get from the set. And there are also a bunch of leaves too. I just wanted to show you how these came together, and I will save these to use on a card later in this video. We'll put that large flower on a letterpress background. But right now I want to use the die set to create a letterpress look. So I again die cut all the pieces for the largest flower. Now I'm using the same dies to cut the same shapes from vellum. The reason is we need vellum on the top of our die cuts in order for the ink to transfer. So we need to have vellum for all of our stacked die cut pieces. So let me show you. Here's the base of the flower. I'm gluing vellum on top of it. Then we have the second layer of our flower, the purple. I'll put a vellum piece on top of that. So just use the same die to cut the same shape, but from vellum, and then I glue it on top. We'll do the same with this next layer. And it really doesn't matter what color cardstocks you use for this. I just use the same colors from before just so it was easier for you to see. And then I have the little yellow shape, which I lost. I had to search for it there, and I'm gluing the vellum piece on top of that. So now we have die cuts, all with vellum on top. It's not going to look pretty, but it's going to work really well. So now we can glue those layers together just like we did with the regular cardstock layers on that example up there on the top. So now I have this stacked die cut where all of the top of it is vellum. That way when we put ink on it, the ink will transfer from the vellum onto our letterpress look. If I didn't put vellum on there and we tried to ink this up, the ink would just absorb into the cardstock and it wouldn't transfer for the letterpress. So that vellum on top is really helpful. Now the leaves from this die set aren't layering, they're just individual leaves. So I wanted to give it dimension, so I glued 2 cardstock die cuts together and then vellum on top of that. So you can see I glued 2 together here, and then I'll glue the vellum on top of that. So this will give us a little bit of dimension to this, a little more dimension, so that it presses into the cardstock better. If I did just 1 layer of cardstock and 1 layer of vellum, it wouldn't make much of an impression. So adding that extra layer under there makes a big difference. Now for the flower at the top that we completed, I did die cut 1 more of the largest die cut shape. You can see the white there. And I'm gluing that on the back just to give this more dimension too. The more dimension that you have, the more it presses into the paper. I usually don't go more than 4 or 5 layers though, because we don't want it to be too thick to go through our machine. If your machine doesn't seem to want to take that many layers, just stop, remove a layer, and then continue. Okay, let's do our letterpress. I have some mini ink blending tools here so I can do multiple colors of ink onto one of our die cuts. So I have the vellum facing up towards the camera, put it on a sticky mat just so it holds as I ink it. I'm applying baby pink to my flower first, and then a little bit of magenta towards the center. I could go direct to paper, but keep in mind, this is a stacked die cut, there's dimension to it. So going direct to paper won't cover it all. A blending brush helps you get into the nooks and crannies a bit better. Then here I'm coming in with the magenta just towards the center. For the leaf, I first applied Firefly, which is a nice light green, and then I put a little bit of darker green Shadow Creek towards the base of the leaves. Now I'll lay this onto my watercolor paper, being careful not to wiggle it around. Put the embossing plate on top and run it through and check out how cool this looks. You get layers of texture and it gives like a little white outline. Look at that, isn't that fun? So I can do this over and over again with that same die cut. So here, let's do another one just to show that, quickly applying ink to it. Don't spend too much time applying the ink because this is kind of supposed to give you a imperfect looking letterpress look. So I just quickly add ink to it. Here we go, adding those to our watercolor paper, running it back and forth, and you'll see the ink transfers great. So the vellum is the key to the ink transferring. That time I did a lighter amount of color. This time I'll switch to another color. This time I'm putting Coral Bliss, which is one of my favorites, and then Ruby Red towards the center. There was still some pink on it from my last one. I didn't clean it off. So we'll end up with like a pink peach color. So we'll run that one through and we get beautiful results once again. So I can continue to make as many as I wanted. I think I did 4 of them and we'll turn 2 of them into cards and I'll do the others later. But you can really see the texture that you get with this. I like the soft look of it. Wish you could see it better in real life, but between the texture and the light ink, it's beautiful. Okay, for sentiments on this, I used 2 sets, the Altenew Sentiment Strips, 1 on the left and 2 on the right. These are great to mix and match on a card. So I chose 3 sentiments that I thought went well together, and I white heat embossed those on some cardstock strips and added them to our flower panel. I trimmed the panel down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch pink note card. And then I scattered a few pearls on the background. So it's actually a very simple design. After you do the die cutting and the gluing together of the cardstock and the vellum, you're ready to run. You can quickly make lots of cards. And here is a peach version. Same design, same sentiments, just changed up the color a little bit. It'd be fun to do like a rainbow of flowers and create a set of cards to give to someone as a gift with this same design. Okay, let's do another faux letterpress technique using a layering die set. This one has more layers to it. Now, if you remember, this is the die set that I used on my first card. I made some peach and yellow flowers. This is the Altenew Jumbo Garden Layering die sets. Once again, the dies that need to be cut from the same colors of cardstock are all hooked together, so it makes it so much better than chasing individual dies around. Here's an example of a guide. They even show you at the top a color combination or which ones to cut from dark, medium, light, or extra light cardstock. And then there's the guide on the bottom that shows you how to assemble them. It really makes it easy having those dies connected. It takes a lot of the arrangement out of it. And again, I did all of my die cutting like before. I taped each of the dies to a piece of cardstock so I knew which to go with what. And once I have them all done, then I do all my die cutting at once. As I was doing this, Lila was watching me and she said, wouldn't it be pretty to die cut those from felt and create a felt rose or flower from that? So we'll definitely have to do that later and maybe put it on a barrette or something, but be fun on a card too. Okay, so I did all my die cutting, and here I have a tray where I'm putting all of the different pieces together. So each compartment is a different flower. So as I do my die cutting, and it comes out of the die cut machine, I just follow the guide and put it into the compartment where that layer will go. So here you can see me coming in with the second, and I put them in with their matching pieces. So before you know it, I have all my pieces die cut, and I have plenty of pieces for the 2 cards that I created earlier and then some. There are also layering pieces for the leaves too. Following the guide, I assembled all the flowers and leaves that you see here, and those are the ones that I used on my cards at the beginning of this video. But now here on the bottom, I'm assembling the pieces with the vellum that we'll use for our faux letterpress technique. Okay, so over here on the right, I die cut all of the layers from cardstock and from vellum and glued each of those layers together. And that's the rose that you see there at the top. So it's cardstock vellum, cardstock vellum, cardstock vellum, all stacked up like we did on our last example. And I did the same for the leaves. So you can see the solid leaves in the back there have vellum on top. Now I've got this detail layer that's cardstock with vellum on top, and I'll glue that on top. So basically, every cardstock die cut has vellum on top, and they're just glued together. So the ones on the left, I'll glue onto my other cards. These here on the right will be used for our letterpress. For this example, I am pressing 3 images into the cardstock, the flower and 2 leaves. You can see there's a lot of detail to it, a lot of nooks and crannies, and I was afraid my cardstock might crack or be rough in some areas. To avoid that, something you can do is spray a light mist of water on your paper first. Basically, what I'm doing is spraying the water into the air and waving my cardstock through it. So it's a very, very light mist of water. But that helps to prevent any cracking when you do this. That's a helpful trick with regular cardstock too, but I'm telling you, watercolor paper is best for this because of that letterpress look. So after doing the light mist, I put some peach colors on my flower, some green on my leaves, laying them down vellum side down, running them through, and we get beautiful results. I'll do a few of these since I can just create them all very quickly and add a sentiment later. I like to keep some of these on hand that I can add any sentiment to, sympathy, birthday, anything, right over that. Okay, now for the particular card I'm making today, I have a coral note card, and I thought I'd do some stamping on it before we add our letterpress piece. So I have this Pinstripe stamp from Altenew that I've used so many times in videos, and I'm stamping it with Coral Bliss ink. I stamped it once, and then I'm rotating my card and stamping it again to create a diamond or plaid pattern. I have a sticky mat in my Misty stamping tool that holds my note card in place as I do this. And that little thing in my hand there that I rubbed over the top, that is an eraser for a dry erase board. It just helps me to press really evenly over the Misty when I'm transferring my ink. Okay, so I decided to trim that down a little bit and trim this panel even smaller. So this is a little bit of a mini card. It's only about 4 inches wide by 5 inches tall. I added a gold hug sentiment to the center and a stamp sentiment strip and some pearls. You can see our diamond stamping on our note card in the background just adds a little bit of interest to it. I chose this particular panel because the inking wasn't perfect. It gave it a nice artsy look. I really wish you could touch this because the texture is wonderful. Now for the sentiment strip, I used a sentiment from this older Altenew stamp set called Hug Me, and it says, "Sending the biggest hug your way." And the hugs is from this Altenew Circled Greeting Hugs die. I've used this one before in a video. It cuts a window with the word hugs, and I just cut the word hugs out and added it to my card. Okay, let's go to another example where we do subtle letterpress in a background. This time I'm using a very intricate die. I wanted to show you that anything would really work for this, so you can use what you have on hand. I'm using the Altenew Festive Floral die set. They're actually meant for holiday, but I figured it would work for an everyday card too. By the way, the tape I'm using here is called Easy C tape. I just discovered this, and I have been on the hunt for a good tape that doesn't tear paper but holds your dies in place as you die cut. And I have tried everything. If you've noticed in my videos, I have had a million different types of tapes lately. And this is my answer. I really, really like this Easy C tape. It just lifts off paper nicely, and you can reuse the pieces over and over again. So I'm really excited to have found that. I'll link to it below if you want to check it out. But I struggled with tapes for a while, finding the right one with the right amount of tack, and this is just finally the answer. Okay, anyways, let's go back to our card. So I die cut the Festive Florals twice from cardstock and once from Vellum and glued them together with Vellum on the top. I inked the surface of that, and now I will lay it down onto my watercolor paper, which I did mist with water a little bit. Run that through, and look at that. Oh, gorgeous. That was the buttercream ink, which is my favorite. So here, let's do it again. This time I'm doing a brighter color. This is maple yellow. Again, I ink up the vellum side, and that vellum is glued on 2 cardstock die cuts. And there we can just position them however we want. And then I'll run that through, and this gives us a brighter option. I wanted something bright from the card example that I'm doing. I thought this bright flower would look cool on it. So you can see how you could do a set of note cards. Look at that faux letterpress look. It's just gorgeous. So even intricate dies work great for this. So try whatever you have. Okay, now this time I decided just to do one. So I'll do it right in the corner and then just stamp a sentiment with it, just to show you can create super simple cards with this also. So you got that letterpress look on the bottom. But for my main card, this is the one where I did the yellow in the background. I added the flower that I created earlier in this video. And then I also added Just Because from this Essential Sentiments die set. You can see all the different sentiments included in it. They're so grateful, here for you, you are so kind, happy birthday, just because, proud of you, hang in there, and happy anniversary. So I just die cut it from black cardstock and put white behind it for it to show through. I also scattered some pearls in the background and added little dots of glossy accents to the center of the flower just for a bit more dimension. So here we have our bold card with that pop of yellow and texture in the background. I know I covered a lot of the letterpress. Some people ask in my videos, why do you cover what you spend so much time on? But for me, it was just kind of about peeking out from that main floral image in the sentiment. But I thought I'd show some where I didn't cover it up as much. This is the buttercream impression that we made. I added the You're So Kind with yellow cardstock and put it on a yellow note card. Very simple design. This again would be a fun one to make a note card set as a gift for someone. Check out the texture of that. Absolutely beautiful. These festive floral dies really worked well with this technique. And another very simple one, I just trimmed this down, added it to a matching note card, and stamped Love You to Pieces. There you can see the texture once again. This is a great one to leave without a sentiment, and then you can add whatever you need when a particular occasion pops up. This sentiment is from this Altenew Wavy Roses stamp set. Okay, let's do another example of the faux letterpress. This time I'm using a daisy die set from Altenew that I've been wanting to use for some time now. So I die cut the flowers from yellow and whites over there just to show you what they look like assembled. Then over here on the right, I have assembled the same die cuts with vellum on top. So it's cardstock vellum, all the way up till I have my layered die cut. And you can see I also did it with a leaf up here. So the ones on the left are how they're intended. The ones on the right are covered with vellum so that we can do our letterpress technique. I'll save the ones on the left for our last cards in this video, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, let's do letterpress with these. So I am covering this with fresh lemon ink. I actually went direct to paper to get a lot of ink down first, and then got it into the nooks and crannies using a blending brush. It doesn't take much effort at all. I then am applying a paper bag, just a little bit towards the center with a blending brush. And then I wanted brown in the center of that, so I have a brown marker. Any kind of watercolor marker, your Tombows, your Zigs, any of those would work for that. So that puts a little bit of brown right at that center, and that ink will transfer too. Now I'm covering my leaves with green, and I'll place that onto my watercolor paper. I didn't have to mist it this time since I'm not doing many layers and I'm not doing many die cuts. So I'll place that on there and then run it back and forth. So this time I used marker also for the ink that transfers, and you can see the brown at the center of the flower. So that's another option. Don't use Copic markers for that though, because that will dry on the vellum and it won't transfer well. Here's the completed card. I trimmed it down and added it to a craft note card. I also used the Altenew Hello and Hugs dies to create that stacked hugs die cut. And then I also added some pearls. Then we have the Thinking of You sentiment, which is from the Altenew Daffodil stamp set. I've used that one before also. This layering die for the daisy didn't have very many layers. There are only like 3 or 4, so it worked great for this. Now I did have those assembled daisies that I wanted to use on a card, so I decided to do letterpress with a background die to demonstrate that background dies work great for this also, and it really worked well. This is the Altenew Cozy Flannel cover die. This is an older die, but I thought it would be fun to try out with this technique. So I die cut it twice from cardstock and once from vellum, and I glued those together so the vellum is on top, again to transfer our ink. So I did this a few times with a few different colors because I really liked the result. I first started with buttercream, which seems to be my favorite for this transfer. I really like light inks for this. I just feel like it goes along with the letterpress look, but you definitely could use vibrant colors if that's what you prefer. So sorry my head gets in the way, but I'm lining it up on my watercolor paper, which I just gave a little mist of water. I'll run it through and check out. It's like little pillows in this flannel looking pattern. Look at that. It's like these little pillows. It's so much fun. So look at your background dies. If you have background dies, a lot of them would work great for this technique too. Okay, next I need sentiments. Here's a little trick that I've been doing lately. Instead of trying to line up to stamp perfect on a sentiment strip, I'm just stamping a sentiment here multiple times with Versamark ink. I will then white heat emboss it. So I have a bunch of sentiments, and then I'll die cut those out with a sentiment strip die. It's so much faster than trying to line things up and get it straight. So after I've heat set that, I have the Altenew Featured Sentiment dies. It has a bunch of different little dies that are sentiment strip size. I chose one of the small ones that fits nicely on it, and I'll just hold it around my sentiment, put some tape on it, and run it through. That way my sentiment is centered on it nicely, and I didn't have to use as much effort to get it just right. And there, once again, you can see that that Easy C tape doesn't tear the cardstock and easily moves around so that you can use it multiple times. Okay, so here are the finished cards. I have my letterpress background that I trimmed and added to a note card, and then we have our daisies glued on top. Now that sentiment that says "You Brighten My Day" is from a stamp set that's not coming till October 22nd. I didn't realize that when I used it, so I can't show you the set, but that's what that sentiment is from. So this shows that that letterpress works great with a background die also. Okay, there you have it. Fun ways to use your die cuts to create a faux letterpress look. I really hope you'll try it. As you can see, it works with many different types of dies. Now, if you are interested in the different products I used today, they are linked below in my YouTube description. I also have much more information on my blog, including photos of all these cards, because I know there were a lot. And you can find my blog by clicking here on the top right. In the middle there are a couple other videos, including another letterpress look. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you soon with another video.